Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. If you enjoy paranormal stories, hauntings, ghosts, peculiar, strange occurrences, all told in either soft spoken or whispered, then you have come to the right channel. So before you put on your headphones, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the like button as well. We're gonna go ahead and get started. I found 5 different places that have some crazy ghost stories. Comment below if you've ever visited any of these and if you have any stories. And the second place on here is the Tower of London, and I've been there twice, I believe. I never felt anything strange, but boy, it's got some stories to tell. If you get a chance, you've got to go. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. The first place in our scary adventures is Poveglia Island near Venice. The early history is in the South Lagoon between Venice and Lido sits the small Italian island of Poveglia that for centuries has been a refuge, stronghold, place of exile, and a dumping ground for the diseased, dying, and deceased. In 421, Poveglia welcomed its first inhabitants, men, women, and children who fled the barbaric invaders that had ravaged the mainland. Its relatively small size made the island defendable and not worth the trouble of invading armies. For centuries, this small community lived in peace and avoided the laws and taxes of the mainland. Their population dwindled, however, and by the 14th century, the island was once again abandoned. In 1348, the bubonic plague arrived in Venice and Poveglia. Like many other small islands became a quarantine colony. The plague killed 1 out of 3 Europeans. Fearing the unbridled spread of the disease, Venice exiled many of its symptom-bearing citizens there. It was clearly a death sentence. At the island's center, the dead and those too sick to protest were burned on giant pyres. This included the tens of thousands of Venice citizens dying on the mainland. These fires would burn once more in 1630 when the Black Death again swept through the city. Long after the fires were extinguished, Napoleon's military campaign relied on the island's ghostly legends and defendable position to protect stores of gunpowder and weapons. The Poveglia Asylum. In the late 1800s, the area's mentally ill resided in an asylum in Poveglia. The asylum was poorly constructed and was used as a place of exile rather than rehabilitation. There are rumors that in the 1930s, a doctor performed strange experiments on the patients here. Eventually, the doctor went mad and threw himself in the asylum's tall bell tower, or from the asylum's tall bell tower. Though the bell in the tower was removed decades ago, locals still claim to hear its chimes echo from the lonely island. By the mid-20th century, the facility was converted into a geriatric center, which closed in 1975. Today, the entire island is abandoned. Locals and tourists are prohibited from visiting, and fishermen steer clear of the accursed place. In recent years, Italian construction crews attempted to restore the former hospital building, but abruptly stopped without explanation, leaving locals to speculate that they were driven away by the island's dark forces. Our second place takes us to the Tower of London. There are supposedly, and I'm sure there are more, 13 ghosts of the Tower of London. Ooh, let's read them. Treason, murder, execution. Built by William the Conqueror in the 11th century to defend and secure his status as King of England, the Tower of London became not only a magnificent fortress, but a royal palace too. It also became the backdrop for some of the grisliest scenes in history. The execution of 3 English queens, Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, and Lady Jane Grey. A mother beheaded for the sins of her son. The supposed murder of the 2 young princes locked up in the Bloody Tower by their uncle, the Duke of Gloucester. Treason, murder, and execution, the stone walls of the Tower of London have seen it all. Little wonder, then, that it is one of the most haunted places in all of Great Britain. Need to hear more? Here are the 13 ghosts of the Tower of London in all their gory glory. Number 1, Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes was taken to the Tower of London after his part in a plot to assassinate James I at Parliament in 1605. Imprisoned in the Queen's house, Guy Fawkes was subjected to intense torture, likely on the rack in the White Tower dungeons. Can you hear his screams? Number 2, Anne Boleyn's procession. As ghost stories go, there are a few as spooky and as tragic as this one. When Henry VIII broke with the Roman Catholic Church to set aside his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and became the supreme head of his new church, the Church of England, Anne Boleyn became Henry's second wife. Just 3 years later, Anne was accused of adultery and taken as a prisoner by barge along the River Thames to the Tower of London through the infamous Traitor's Gate. Anne was beheaded on Tower Green and laid to rest in the Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula, St. Peter in Chains, the parish church of the Tower of London. Some 340 years later, a soldier reported seeing a light burning in the closed chapel. After climbing to a window to look within, the soldier is said to have seen a procession of knights and ladies led by a headless Anne Boleyn. Number 3. Henry VI. Imprisoned in the Wakefield Tower of the Tower of London, Henry VI was murdered at the altar in the king's private chapel in 1471, close to midnight. Henry's ghost is believed to haunt the Wakefield Tower, appearing on the stroke of midnight. Number 4. The Ghost of a Bear. Henry III housed his menagerie of wild animals at the Tower of London, including a gift of either lions or leopards from the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II in 1235. Pumas, tigers, jackals, an elephant from France, and even a polar bear were to follow. Visitors came to the tower to see the creatures, with bear baiting going on and to become a popular pastime in 16th and 17th century London. And it seems the horrors of this pastime are still heard today, with the ghost of a bear, which is said to appear from behind the door of the jewel room. Perhaps a spectral guard to the crown jewels? The ghost of a black bear is also reported to have appeared near the Marton Tower in 1816. Number 5. Sir Walter Raleigh. Sent to the tower no less than 3 times, explorer Sir Walter Raleigh was imprisoned by both Elizabeth I and James I, spending over 13 years in the Bloody Tower during one confinement and attempting suicide. Sir Walter Raleigh's last imprisonment at the Tower of London in the Beauchamp Tower took place in 1603, before he was beheaded outside the Palace of Westminster. 6. The Faceless Young Woman. In 1957, Welsh guardsman Johns was on sentry duty at the Salt Tower when he encountered a shapeless form with the face of a young woman, perhaps one of the many women who suffered a terrible fate at the Tower of London. Number 7. Margaret Pole. Like Anne Boleyn, the beheading of Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, took place on Tower Green, which lies to the west of the White Tower. Brought to the scaffold by Henry VIII for the crime of being the mother of Cardinal Pole, who opposed Henry's self-created position as supreme head of the Church of England. Margaret Pole was 67 at the time of her death. Eyewitnesses say the executioner on the fateful day in 1541 was a wretched and blundering youth who, unable to perform a clean execution with his axe, instead hacked at Margaret Pole's head and shoulders. That eternal scream echoes through the towers today. Number 8. The White Figure. The Tower of London is protected by the yeoman warders, nicknamed Beefeaters. In 1864, Captain J.D. Dundas observed a yeoman attempting to charge a whitish female figure with his bayonet. Chillingly, this apparition appeared in the courtyard where Anne Boleyn was beheaded. Number 9. Lady Jane Grey. Known as the English Queen with the shortest reign, Protestant Lady Jane Grey became queen after the death of King Edward VI, son of King Henry VIII. Edward named Lady Jane Grey as his heir in his last will over his half-sister Mary. A pawn in royal power games, the king's protector John Dudley had arranged for the 16-year-old Lady Jane Grey to marry his son, Lord Guilford Dudley. On Edward's death on 6th July 1553, Lady Jane Grey became queen, a title she was to hold for just 9 days before the council decreed the Catholic Mary was the true ruler of England. Lady Jane Grey and her husband Dudley were executed on the infamous Tower Green in 1554. The white figure of Jane is said to haunt the battlements of the Tower of London to this day. Number 10. The Monk's Footsteps. If you visit the Tower of London, listen out for the sound of sandals slapping against the stone floors, reported to be from the steps of a ghostly monk. Number 11. Arbella Stewart. An oft-repeated ghost sighting at the Tower of London is that of Arbella Stewart, cousin to Elizabeth I. Arbella was imprisoned by James I for marrying William Seymour, nephew of Lady Jane Grey, without royal consent. Seeing this match as a possible threat to his throne, James placed Arbella under arrest at the Tower, where she either refused to eat or was purposefully starved. Arbella's ghost is thought to stalk the Queen's house. 12. The Lost Princess. On the death of Edward IV, Edward's young son, 12-year-old Edward, became King Edward V under the protection of his uncle, the Duke of Gloucester. Wanting to take the crown for his own, the Duke of Gloucester imprisoned Edward and his young brother Richard in the Tower of London. Their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, took sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. After declaring young Edward illegitimate, the Duke of Gloucester became King Richard III, and Edward and Richard were never seen again, believed to be murdered at the order of their uncle. The bones of 2 children were later found beneath a staircase in the Tower of London. 13. The Nameless Thing. Lastly is the Nameless Thing, a petrifying spirit which follows the guards of the tower as they walk their beat from the river's Sally Portal entrance. So it says, a terrifying tourist attraction since the 18th century. The Tower of London has been a tourist attraction since the 18th century, so you can experience the chilling atmosphere of the tower yourself. Or better yet, on a London Walks tour, where our expert guides will reveal even more chilling tales of the ghosts of London. Our next place is the Queen Mary, which I believe, it states that this hotel is the most haunted in America. Now, Now, I've stayed in several most haunted places in America, so everybody seems to want their place to be the most haunted. Now, I have stayed in a few. I'll have to tell those stories one day soon. It says the historic Queen Mary is a stately ship turned hotel in Long Beach, California, with a haunted history. Amid the Art Deco style and grand splendor of the Queen Mary lies another, more sinister force that begs to be found, if you dare, that is. The Queen Mary, a ship that was converted into a hotel and permanently docked in Long Beach, California, is as stately as they come. But don't let its lush appearance fool you. It also happens to be one of the most haunted hotels in America. Unfortunately, at the time of the writing of this blog, it says that it's closed for repairs. So check their website to make sure they're open if you plan on staying there. So we'll go ahead and keep going. The haunted history of the Queen Mary. The ship was first christened on September 26, 1934 by Queen Mary herself, and it was retired more than 3 decades later. It has since been converted into a hotel where guests can sleep surrounded by the original wood panelings and portals, imagining what it would have been like to cross the Atlantic in style. You won't be the only guests hanging out on board the historic ship. In fact, the spirits are said to haunt several different places on board, and the hotel offers ghost tours to take full advantage of the spooky stories. Quote, not only does the Queen Mary offer transatlantic history, but it is known as one of the most haunted destinations in America. Chris Woolmuth, the director of marketing at the Queen Mary, told Travel and Leisure in an email. The unique history of the ship allows us to offer one-of-a-kind and authentic experiences that delve into the paranormal, from evening tours and ghost investigations to overnight stays in our most haunted stateroom, B340. These are the most haunted spots for the spookiest ship experience you're likely to ever have. So the Queen Mary's most haunted rooms, stateroom B340. This stateroom has a problem. Let's start that again. The stateroom was a problem long before the Queen Mary opened as a hotel. In 1948, a British third-class passenger, Walter J. Adamson, passed away in the room, and the details of his death are unknown. Later, in 1966, a woman staying in the room reported that she was woken up when the bed covers were pulled off of her and she saw a man standing at the foot of her bed. She screamed and rang for the steward, but the man apparently vanished into thin air. Years later, guests staying in the room have reported hearing someone knocking on the door in the middle of the night and seeing bathroom lights mysteriously turn on. Even the hotel's maids started complaining that they would find the bathroom water running even when no one had stayed in the room for days. And one reported that the bed covers were pulled off right after she put them on. The room was closed to guests for many years, but it has since reopened for anyone looking for an evening of creepy fun. The Mauritania room. 2 women were sent to clean this lounge for a VIP reception. When they entered the room, they found a passenger sitting on a chair in the middle of the dance floor who didn't say a word. When a third woman came in to help with the cleaning, she remarked that the passenger was staring, and she asked the passenger to move. As the employees started to call security, the passenger faded right in front of them, a feat all 3 women reported seeing at the same time. The Mayfair Room. This room was once the ship's beauty salon, but now it is used as offices for the hotel. In 2001, a member of the accounting staff came in early to work at 5:30 a.m. to be exact, and simply felt like something was off. She went about her office tasks before sitting down at her desk and feeling unusually cold. Later, she felt someone brush up against the back of her chair, but no one was there. Just minutes after that, the woman saw a transparent figure in white walk across the room and pass through the door. Needless to say, the employee grabbed her keys and fled the room until her coworkers arrived. The first class swimming pool. This now abandoned pool on board was once the epitome of luxury, with an illuminated fountain, a mother-of-pearl ceiling, and elaborate mosaic tiles. The pool is no longer in use because of California code issues, but that doesn't stop it from being one of the hotbeds of paranormal activity on the ship. People have reported seeing a number of ghosts here, including a young woman in a tennis skirt walking downstairs and disappearing behind a pillar, a woman in an old wedding gown next to the pool with a little boy in a suit, and a cloud of steam appearing out of nowhere, along with a little girl in a blue and white dress who disappears in an instant. Boiler room number 4. Several people have reported seeing a little girl in this area, sometimes sucking her thumb and sometimes with a doll in hand. Whether or not the room is haunted by that little girl will probably just choose to stay away. Hatch door number 13. This hatch door is known as Shaft Alley, and it was the site of a gruesome accident that saw a crewman crushed to death. One night in 1966, the watertight doors in the engine and boiler rooms were ordered to be closed. About 5 minutes later, an 18-year-old crew member from Yorkshire was found crushed in the door of hatch number 13, trapped with his arms pinned to his side. While the man was freed and carried to the hospital ward, it was too late. He showed signs of crushing injury on his arms, chest, and pelvis, and was bleeding from his nose. He was injected with morphine but died shortly after. His ghost is regularly seen around the area now, with people reporting the sound of someone running behind them and whistling. Eey. Others have possibly made contact with the doomed crewmen, noticing spots of grease that look like fingerprints on their faces. Some have even seen a figure of a bearded man in blue coveralls that looks just like the man who died out of the corner of their eyes. And several others have said they saw an engineer wandering the hallways asking if guests had seen his wrench, but when they went back to find him, he had disappeared. I don't know about that whistling part, that's kind of creepy. Our next place is, and I'm sure you've probably heard of it, Myrtle's Plantation. And the question for this is Myrtle Plantation the most haunted home in America? Some say 9 different ghosts walk the grounds of the Louisiana Bed and Breakfast. There are lots of supposedly haunted places in the South, but Myrtle's Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana, roughly 30 miles north of Baton Rouge, may just be home to the region's most alleged ghosts per square foot. In fact, the mansion's former owner, Francis Kermeen, takes it a step further, calling the house the most haunted in America. Frances and her former husband James bought the plantation turned in 1980 after visiting it while on vacation. They were in their 20s at the time and knew little about the property's history. By the time they would leave, more than 10 years later, Frances would have a trove of otherworldly encounters to rehash, and her marriage would be over. Frances chronicled the frightening ordeal in her 2005 book, The Myrtle's Plantation, The True Story of America's Most Haunted House. Frances moved down to Louisiana first. James stayed behind in California to tie up loose ends. During the transition between owners, the 28-room Creole cottage-style bed and breakfast continued honoring its guest reservations, and the previous innkeeper stayed on to show Frances the ropes. On her second night there, a terrifying encounter left Frances reeling. She states, "I had heard footsteps coming up the stairs and I didn't think anything of it. But I had left my light off and I woke up and it was on, so I turned it off. Then the footsteps started up the stairs again. I figured it was one of the other guests, but then the doorknob started rattling. I called out and nobody answered." Frances told the podcast Mysterious Universe in 2015. Concerned that someone had tried to enter her room, Frances made a dash downstairs once she thought the coast was clear and tried to wake the owner. When he didn't respond, she sought liquid courage from a few nips of cherry brandy and eventually fell asleep on a sofa. She awoke to the feeling of someone watching her. She stated, "I looked up and standing over me was a black lady. Her head was wrapped in a green turban," Frances described on the podcast. "I could see her holding an old-fashioned tin with the loop in it through the candlelight, and I lost it. I started screaming. I reached my hand out to touch her. I could tell she was a ghost because she was see-through, but as my hand passed through her, she faded away." Legend has it that a slave girl named Chloe was hanged on the property around 1823 after she served poisoned food laced with oleander, according to some, resulting in the death of the lady of the house, Sarah Woodruff, and her 2 young daughters. Other sources, however, indicate Sarah and her child died of yellow fever. General Dave Bradford built Myrtle's Plantation, then called Laurel Grove, in 1796. after he was banished from the United States for his involvement in the Pennsylvania Whiskey Rebellion, thus earning him the nickname Whiskey Dave. His wife and 5 children joined him there several years later. His daughter Sarah later inherited the house after marrying Judge Clark Woodruff. Following the death of his wife and 2 of his 3 children from either yellow fever or slave insurgents, depending on who you ask, he sold the property to Ruffin Sterling, who expanded the house and renamed it after the nearby grape myrtles. Over the course of its 221-year history, Myrtles has witnessed numerous deaths, some natural, others the result of violent confrontations. William Winter, a lawyer who lived there from 1865 to 1871, was shot on the porch. Rumors allege that he staggered into the house, started going up the stairs, looking for his wife, and died on the 17th step. Modern-day employees and guests have claimed to have heard his dying steps on the stairwell. Chloe and William Winter are just 2 of the 9 ghosts Frances says inhabit Myrtles. Though some say numerous murders have occurred there, historic records only confirm the shooting death of Winter. Frances states, "I had thousands of reports from guests in my 10 years there, from hearing things, seeing things, the bed lifting and floating around the room, to being chased down the stairs with a broom." Other supernatural sensory effects reported there include the scent of perfume emanating from an unknown source, and distant sounds of babies crying and parties happening, again with no logical source. The home's stained glass entrance, an original feature, bears the emblem of the French cross. The porch and shutters are painted in haint blue, another superstitious precaution to ward off malevolent spirits. As with any good ghost story, the tale of Myrtle's Plantation has its critics. A Virginia Ghosts forum points to local newspaper reporting of William Winter's death, for example. The impact of a single shotgun blast killed him instantly, it claims, effectively negating any logic behind reports of hearing Winter's fateful footsteps on the stairs. For their part, the current owners of the Myrtles seem to have embraced its place as America's most haunted home. They've dedicated a section of its online presence to history and hauntings and offer daily tours of the plantation's history, mystery, and intrigue. Our last place takes us to Paris, and we are going to jump into, well, maybe not jump into, but we're going to go into the Paris catacombs, legends and myths. Who doesn't love a good story? Some places naturally produce better stories than others. The Paris catacombs, the final resting place to 6 million people, and a tourist attraction with lines wrapping around the block, falls into this category. Here are a few of the bone-chilling stories from inside the Paris catacombs, sure to inspire you in the exploration of its dark depths. The uncovered video camera. This is by far one of the creepiest Paris catacombs legends. In the early 1990s, a group of cataphiles people who study and explore the Paris catacombs regularly, was walking through the dark chambers of the ossuary when they found a video camera on the ground. The camera still had footage on it. As they watched, they heard disturbing noises. From the video, they could tell the man holding the camera was lost and had no idea how to escape. The more they watched, the more it became clear the man was going mad in the underground network of tunnels. The video ends abruptly with the man dropping his camera to the ground. To this day, no one knows who he was or if he ever managed to get out alive. Many believe that the movie As Above, So Below was inspired by this tragedy. Possibly linked to the video camera story above, a famous Paris catacombs legend has it that something terrifying happens in the burial site after midnight. Keep your wits about you if you're inside the Paris catacombs after midnight. According to this legend, that's when the walls begin to speak. It is said disembodied voices will try to persuade you to venture ever deeper into the catacombs until you can't find your way out again. And there you have it. Would you go into the Paris catacombs? I would, but not if the walls start telling me to go deeper. I'm sorry, I'm out of there. So have you been to the most haunted places in the world? I know there are more. We're going to find them. When I went to the Tower of London back the first time, back in 2008, I remember I was filming, so I had my little camcorder, and I was walking up the circular stairs, and I got like so sick to my stomach. I just kept trying to walk. My legs got real weak and I got real dizzy, and I don't know if it's just because the line, I mean, you had to go forward. You couldn't stop because you had everybody coming up behind you. But it was one of those narrow, winding staircases, and I just kept going round and round and round, and I remember coming out of there just like I'm going to either pass out. I was sweating. I was so just disoriented, and then it went away. But I just remember that moment because my husband was walking ahead of me, and he turned around and took a picture of me, and I got this like wide-eyed, weird smiley face going on behind my camera. I looked like I was just about in panic mode. I don't like that picture. I know I have it, but it's just, I just remember that time of the Tower of London, and I can't remember anything else that would have frightened me, but I did go to the site where Anne Boleyn was beheaded, and her axe and not the stone, but the wood place that you rest your head on to be beheaded is in the Tower of London. So it's a fantastic place to visit. Well, London's just amazing, and I've got so many stories about London. I'll have to do a video on that here soon. So until then, hit that subscribe button. I hope you enjoyed some of the places in America that are the most haunted. And if you've been to any of them, comment below and I'll read it in one of the future broadcasts. Until then, stay a little scared.